What is going on, guys? Welcome back. In this crash course today, we're going to learn about NGINX, which is one of the most important tools when it comes to professional and scalable deployment of applications. Now, NGINX is essentially a web server, but it can also be used as a reverse proxy. It can be used as a load balancer. It can be used for SSL termination. It has a bunch of different use cases, and all of them are pretty important when it comes to professional deployment of applications. So this is a must-have tool in your arsenal, and in this video today we're going to cover the different use cases with examples. So let us get right into it. Alright, so we're going to learn about NGINX in this video today. And I want to get started right away by showing you the definition. So when you Google NGINX, you're going to get, on the one hand here, this Gemini overview, and also down here you're going to see the Wikipedia definition. No matter where you go, you're going to see that NGINX is essentially a web server, but also you're going to read everywhere that it can be used as a bunch of different things, like a reverse proxy, load balancer, and so on. And my goal for this video today is to show you the various sites, the various use cases of NGINX using simple examples. Now, this is by no means going to be a complete NGINX course, especially not in terms of depth. I'm going to show you a bunch of things you can do with NGINX, but I'm going to keep it quite simple and high level. I want to cover a lot of things, and then you can go into more details on your own if you want to, but NGINX is one of the most important tools in the process of deployment. On this channel, we oftentimes talk about training models, building applications, looking at new packages and libraries, doing certain things, but we don't talk too often about the deployment process. And if you don't know how to deploy an application properly, professionally, and in a scalable way, it's basically useless because it cannot actually work in production. It cannot actually be used by a lot of users. So NGINX is one of the most important tools in your arsenal when it comes to deployment, which is why we're going to learn about it in this video today. Now let us get started with the installation and the setup right away. This process can be different depending on your operating system. I'm currently on Linux, to be precise on Pop! OS, which is Ubuntu based. So in my case, all I have to do is I have to open up the command line and I have to say sudo apt install NGINX. This is going to install it. In my case, if I type my password now, you're going to see this is already installed, so nothing happens, as you can see here. But depending on your operating system, this is going to be different. So just go to nginx.org, go to install, and follow the instructions for your respective operating system. Once you have this done, the important thing is to locate the config file. Everything in NGINX is based on the configuration and on the config file that contains the configuration. Now, this config file can be located in a number of different places. So you want to go to nginx.org, you want to go to the beginner's guide, and you want to see down here, there are three possible locations. One is /user local nginx conf, another one is /etc nginx, and another one is /user local etc nginx. So depending on your installation, you're going to have a different, the config file is going to be located at a different place. And in my case, it is located at /etc nginx. So when I type ls, you can see here I have the nginx.conf file. Now, by default, there is some config in there already, which you can use, some default config. You can adjust it if you want to. In my case, what I did is I just removed everything. I have now an empty events context and an empty HTTP context. So these two empty blocks, and we're going to configure everything from scratch. You can do that as well if you want to for learning purposes, or you can use an existing config and adjust it. Now, for the sake of completeness, I should mention that there is an approach that we're not going to use in this video today, which is to use the two directories called sites available and sites enabled. The basic idea is you put all your different configs for NGINX in sites available. So in here you have the custom config, the default config, the reverse proxy, the mail proxy, whatever configs you want to have. And these are just config files that exist. So these are the same as the nginx conf file that we're going to be changing. So we have servers in here, we define locations and all that, which we're going to learn about in this video today. But these are just existing, so they're not enabled. They're not actually being used. If we want to use a config like this, we go to sites enabled and we make a link. So sites enabled, basically here now the custom config from sites available is linked here. So this is a link to this config, which means it's enabled. But this is also not the case by default. For this, you would have to go to the config file, so to the nginx.config file, and you would have to use an include statement. So you would use something like include and then the file that you want to include. I just wanted to mention this for the sake of completeness. If you're interested in that approach where you have all the configs existing and you can enable and disable them by using ln and by using unlink, the two commands to link and unlink, you can do that. You can research that. We're not going to do it in this video today. We're going to keep it simple and focus only on this nginx.conf file. Now, let us briefly talk about the structure of this course today. I want to cover a couple of examples of using NGINX in different ways, and we're going to start by using NGINX as a basic web server, so just serving static content. Then we're going to use it as a reverse proxy in a simple way, just to combine a backend and a frontend and run them as a single web application. The idea of a reverse proxy is you have multiple servers in the background, and you have one NGINX server instance between this collection of servers, let's say, and the client, and then the client makes requests to the NGINX instance, and the NGINX instance makes the appropriate requests to the respective servers and then responds to the client. That's the basic idea, and we're going to use that, or we're going to use NGINX to combine a frontend and a backend into a single server so that we can run everything through port 80 HTTP. Then we're going to look at SSL termination, so we're going to see how we can use certificates, how we can terminate SSL, so how we can basically encrypt and decrypt the communication with the client using NGINX. And we're also going to learn how to use NGINX as a load balancer afterwards. So we're going to learn how to have multiple servers, so multiple instances of the same backend server, for example, and how we can use NGINX to distribute the load, to distribute the requests across these servers. Then we're also going to take a look at a simple caching example. And finally, we're going to look at a simple Docker Compose setup. So this is the plan for this video today. Let's get started right away with the simple web server setup. Now, for this, I'm going to open up my nginx.conf file, and I'm going to use a special command here, which is just an alias. I call it nvsu because I use nv usually for NeoVim. nvsu allows me to use it with sudo privileges. The basic command I'm using is just sudo edit. So sudo edit allows us to edit a file with sudo privileges while still remaining in our user, essentially. So I'm not actually using the root user. I just use my neural 9 user, but I do it with sudo privileges. And this is useful because you can see here that I don't have permission to edit these files without that command. So if I do nv nginx conf and I try to change something, you're going to see, first of all, it tells me it's only it's opened in read-only mode. And if I try to write, you can see read-only option is set. So I have to do nvsu nginx conf. This is going to open up a temporary file, and then this is going to be copied into the actual config file once I'm done. That's the basic idea, just so you're not confused about the command. In your case, you can just use sudo edit as well, or you can go into the root user and use vi, or you can use whatever you want. Just wanted to point that out because people otherwise are going to ask me about that command. But the basic idea now is we want to serve static content. Now, we're not really going to focus in this video on the events context here. We're going to focus mainly on the HTTP context. And in here, we're going to define, now for starters, we're going to define a simple server instance. So in this context, we want to have a server. And for this server, we want to define a location. Now, what we need to define for the server as well is if we don't want to use port 80, we need to define the port that we want to listen to. So there's the directive called listen, and here we can provide now a port, for example, 9999 if we want to. We can also provide port 80, but this is redundant, so you can also just not provide anything. This is going to listen on port 80, but if you want to, for some reason, be explicit here, you can say listen 80, and this is of course 90, listen 80, and it's going to have the same effect as not putting anything there at all. So the interesting thing here now is the location keyword. So we provide after the location keyword a path, for example, / for the default route. And then in this block here, we provide the root directory for that path. So for example, if I want to say that everything that comes after the / shall be appended to a certain root path, I first of all need to create that directory on my system. So on the server that is running NGINX, I need to make sure that this exists. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to the root directory here. And in this case, I created already a data directory. So I did sudo make directory data. And in this data directory, I have nothing right now. So I'm going to say sudo make directory www I'm going to enter my password, and in this directory, I'm going to create a file, which I'm going to call index.html. And here, let's just put a simple heading, hello world, /h1. There you go. And let's also say other.html. And let's here say something like other file, just so we have two files. And the basic idea now is when someone calls or when someone sends a request to the server to the location / and then, for example, /index.html /other HTML, what I want to do is I want to get the files from this directory. How do I do that? I do that by providing the keyword root. And I basically say root data, so /data /www, and then just a semicolon. So this is going to basically say that is the root directory, and whatever you put here after the / is going to be put here after the /. So that is a very basic setup. We can actually go and use this right away. The important thing is we need to load this config. Now, first of all, we need to start NGINX if it's not already running. And one thing that you want to do here is you want to check if something else on your system is using port 80. Maybe you have some Docker container running. Maybe you have an Apache server running. Maybe you have some Flask application running. I don't know what you're doing on your system, but maybe you have something running. So you want to type on Linux lsof-i and then port 80, so :80. In my case, nothing is running here. So I can go ahead and say sudo nginx. This is going to run nginx. It's going to boot up the instance. And now I can open up a browser. Let me do that here briefly on my other screen. Now, one important thing before I show you the result, because I ran into this problem right now, is when you edit a file with sudo edit, you need to close it for the changes to be applied. So you actually want to go to the config file, so nginx conf, and you want to make the change, and then you want to close it, then it's going to be applied. And then what you need to do, if nginx is already running, the first time it doesn't matter, but if nginx is already running and you want to apply the changes in the configuration, you need to say sudo nginx and then -s reload. This is going to reload the configuration, so it's going to be applied. And then when we go to localhost, we're going to see the index.html file. So you can see here the hello world heading. And also if I go here and say /other.html, it's going to go to the other file because this is exactly what our config is specifying. And what I can do now is I can create multiple such locations. So I can go back into the config file with sudo privileges, and I can say I want to have an additional location here, location / let's call this /server1, just to see what we can do here. And essentially I can say that my root directory for this one is, I don't know, data other stuff. Just making stuff up right now to show you how it works. Then what I would have to do is I would have to navigate to this directory here again. So to /data, I would have to do sudo make directory other stuff. So I need a password for this. Then I go to other stuff. Here I create now again with sudo a directory server1. And in this server1 directory, for example, I can create now another index.html file. I'm not going to use a heading. I'm just going to say you are on server 1. There you go. And the idea now is that everything in the URL that has /server1 in it will be mapped to data other stuff server1. So whenever I say location server1 / whatever.html, it's going to be mapped to the file data other stuff server1 whatever HTML. That's the basic idea. And for this to work, I need to, of course, say sudo nginx-s reload. And to see what config is currently being used, I can just use -T. This is going to show me that this config is actually active right now. So I can go and say /server1 and actually /server1 /index.html. And you can see this works. I think it should also work with / in the end. Yeah, there you go. So this shows me you are on server 1. This is how we can map stuff like this. We can also use a different keyword called alias if we want to have a different behavior. For example, if I want to have /whatever, let's say this is my route, and I want to map this to an alias. So I want to say basically, let's do /data server2. This has a different effect now because this means that whatever is going to be mapped to server 2. So if I go back and I create with sudo privileges a directory server 2, I can go into it. I can create a new index.html file. I can say hello from server 2. I didn't use sudo now. Great. Hello from server 2. And now if I save that and I say again reload, then when I go to /whatever, did I mess something up? I think so. Oh, of course, because server 2 should not be here. We want to move server 2 to one directory up. Was this correct now? There you go. This should work now. Forbidden. Oh, this is probably because I'm missing a slash here, so we need to actually go back into the config and say /, because otherwise this is going to be confusing. Of course, there you go. Hello from server 2, because basically we're saying that /whatever/ is an alias for data /data/server2/ now. The current configuration is this one. This is now correct. So this is the very basic way in which you can serve static files. I don't want to talk too much about this. There's also some stuff that you can do with regex here and with certain file types. I don't want to focus on that too much because I want to focus on the reverse proxy capabilities, on the load balancing and so on. So we're going to move on now. So let us now take a look at a simple example of using NGINX as a reverse proxy in order to centralize the routing. So we're going to have multiple servers running on different ports, but we're going to have only a single server for the client to communicate with. So the client can send the requests to the same port, to the same server, but NGINX is going to route the requests accordingly behind the scenes. So in this case, we're going to keep it simple. We're going to have a front end and a back end, and the back end is going to be accessible through the API route. So we're going to use the same server, but /API. In practice, you could also have 5 different backends, 5 different APIs that you can access with different routes, but all of them are running, for example, on port 80. This is a common use case for NGINX. For this, let me move my browser to the second screen. Let's go to my working directory here. I have prepared a simple backend and a simple front end. The backend is a Flask backend. We can take a look at it. It just has a simple hello world endpoint and a simple addition endpoint, which takes 2 integers and returns the result as a string. Besides that, we're just specifying a port. If we don't specify one, we're running on 5555. This is going to be interesting later on when we get to load balancing. For now, that's the server, quite simple. And we also have a React frontend. This React frontend has a simple service TypeScript file where we fetch the hello world message and we also fetch the addition result. And then we have a simple component using all of that. We're not going to go into the code too much here. Just accept that we have a front end and we have a back end running on different ports. The front end is running on port 5173 or 51, what was it? Yeah, 5173. And the back end is running on port 5555. So we can actually run them independently here without NGINX. What this would look like is we would just say npm run dev. We would open up a second terminal, current, then go to backend and just do a Python 3 app.py. So now we have the backend running, we have the front end running. Let's go to a different workspace now. Let's go to localhost port 5137. 73, sorry. There you go. This is now my front end and it would interact with the back end, but since I set it up in a way that it requests on the same port, it's not going to work now. So if I click the buttons, nothing is going to happen just because I already configured it in a way that is going to be necessary for our NGINX setup. What do I mean by that? If we go into my front end, you're going to see something interesting in, I think it was the service TypeScript file. The base URL that we're targeting here is either passed through the environment, or it's localhost port 80, because we don't specify a port, /API. Now, we can also comment this out and use this configuration here, so we can rerun the same thing. But for this to work now, we would also have to enable course in Flask, so cross-origin resource sharing, which means that since this is coming from a different origin, a different port, we need to allow for that. We need to go into our Flask code if we want to make this work locally. This is now not part of the NGINX course, but we would have to say from Flask course, which is a package that you need to install, import course, and then course app to allow for that. Now, when I run this and I go to the browser, this should be possible now. So we get hello world, and if I do something like 6 and 4, I get 10 as a result. So this works. But this is of course not what we want to do. What we want to do is we want to have everything running on the same port. We don't need course in this case. We can just say everything is port 80. Port 80 is communicating with itself. This is the setup that is preferred and professional for production. So we're going to go back into our source code. We're going to go back into the service file, and we're going to change this back to the localhost /API. So the code is not really important. We're not going to focus on the TypeScript or Python code here today. It's just one example. You need the front end to communicate with the back end, and you need to instruct the front end to actually communicate with localhost /API or whatever you want to call the route, not with some port number that that the server is running on, because NGINX will handle all of that for us. So we actually want to communicate with NGINX. And for the backend, you can keep the course if you want to, but it's not necessary, which is also a benefit of using NGINX in this case. So let's run this again, and let's now configure NGINX for this to work properly. So npm run def, and now let's move this to a different workspace here. Let's move this onto my Git section down here. And now what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the configuration again. So we're going to go back to etc and NGINX. I'm going to zoom in, and we're going to say nvsu, or sudo edit in your case, probably nginx.conf. And now we want to change this configuration so that our two servers are accessible through the same port. So we're going to keep the server, we're going to keep listen 80. We're going to also add a server name. In practice, this would be your domain name. In my case now, this is just localhost. And now we're going to say that the default location, so the /location, we're going to use a different keyword here, which is proxy_pass. So this means whatever we get here is going to be passed to a certain endpoint. In our case now, this is http://localhost, and we want to access the front end, so 5173, and we're going to provide a / in the end as well. So that means that whatever we get at this endpoint is going to be redirected to the front end. The same can now be done with a backend. We said we're going to call this API, so the location /API is going to be passed to the following. We're going to do a proxy pass http://localhost 5555, like this. We don't need that, and that should actually be it. This is the minimal setup. We can also add some stuff like proxy set header, so we can also pass information. We can do something like proxy set header host, and we can say $host to also transmit the host information and the real IP address and so on. So x real IP should be remote_address. This can be useful for logging and for keeping track of everything, so that we get this information in the backend and in the front end. But essentially that configuration is enough. So we can now go and actually, I should close this. I don't need a second terminal. I can say sudo nginx-s reload, and now we go back to our browser. This time we don't go to 5173, we go to localhost. Now you can see port 80 localhost is running the app, and if I click, I get a mistake or I get a problem. What is that? Oh, okay, I get a problem because I'm using HTTPS here, which is incorrect. So we need to go back to our code, which is here. So I go back to my front-end code. This seems to be a mistake here in the service TS file. Of course, we're aiming for HTTP. I have a third line here. So HTTP localhost, not HTTPS. This is what we're going to use later when we talk about the SSL termination and the certificates. But now this should work. I don't even think we need to reload. Let's go back. Okay, seems like I get a bad gateway. So let's see what the config looks like right now. I'm not sure what the problem is. HTTP. Okay, the problem is, of course, not with the config, but the server is not running because I didn't run it. So we need to do npm run def. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to access anything. And now let's go back, run this. There you go. We have our front end. And if I now click on fetch hello, I get hello world. And if I add some numbers here, I get the result. And what I can also do now is I can say /API and I get hello world. And I can say /API /add and I think 1020 and I get 30. So I can access the backend and the front end in the same location here, or in the same at the same port at least. And that is also a common use case for NGINX, just combining everything, centralizing everything into one place. All right, next up, we're going to take a look at how to use NGINX for SSL termination. So how we can use it to allow for encrypted connections, how we can use it to enable HTTPS, not just HTTP. And of course, this is done with certificates. So in practice, you would go to a trusted authority, you would get a certificate, and you would use that. In this case, we're going to just use OpenSSL locally to show how it's done, and then you can apply the same process to an actual certificate that you get from an authority. But the concept is quite simple. We're also going to redirect all the HTTP requests to the HTTPS endpoint. We're going to see how this is done in NGINX. But the idea is the following. We just generate a key pair. We can do that easily. Let's go to the current directory. We can do that easily by saying open SSL. Of course, you need to install that if you don't have it. rec-x509 -notes -days. We want to have it for 365 days. Valid -new key. RSA 248 or 2048. Then key out is private key, or actually let's call it priv key .pem. Dash out is going to be full chain .pem. And the rest is just going to be us pressing enter here. Now we have the certificate, or now we have the key pair, so to say. We have the private one, which is for decryption, and we have this for encryption. And we're going to now provide these two to NGINX to actually use them for HTTPS access. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to use nvsu again on my config file. And what we're going to do here now is we're going to say we're no longer listening on port 80. We are now listening on 443 with SSL. So this now allows for HTTPS essentially. And what we also need to specify now is the certificate and the certificate key. So SSL certificate is going to be the following: home, in my case, neural 9, documents / programming / neural 9 / python / current, and then the full chain.pem. Then SSL certificate key is going to be the private key. So the private key.pem. And of course, we need a semicolon in the end here. That is basically now specifying this is what we use for encryption. This is what we use for decryption. And all we need to do now is we need to redirect all the other stuff. So all the stuff that is not HTTPS, all the stuff that is coming in from port 80, we need to redirect it here to port 443. And we do that by specifying another server. And this server here is going to listen on port 80. Again, we don't need to explicitly specify it. I'm going to do it anyway. Server name is going to be localhost, and then the important statement is we want to say return 301, which is a code for the redirect, http :// and then $host, and then $request_URI. So we're basically taking the host, that was passed and also the path, but we are redirecting to our encrypted instance here. So that is essentially the config. It's not very complicated. It's the same as before, just that we have now HTTPS. Now, keep in mind, we still use HTTP internally. So we still don't have to communicate internally using HTTPS. We can just keep the communication within the same server. We can keep it unencrypted. Everything is happening between the user and between the NGINX instance. However, since our frontend is communicating with the NGINX instance, we need to specify that we want to use HTTPS there. So I'm going to go to my current directory, or actually I still have the instance running. So let's go here and let's change this to be using HTTPS. So now it's communicating here with localhost, but 443, communicating with the API here. And I think, if I didn't forget anything, that should be it. Sudo nginx-s reload. Now let's go here. Let's go to HTTP. Isn't redirected properly. Oh, of course, I need to specify HTTPS. Otherwise, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So now it says here, warning, potential security risk ahead. I just need to accept that. The reason is because we don't have an actual certificate. So I'm going to just accept this, and I get a bad gateway. Probably same reason, front end is not running. npm run dev. There you go. Let's go back, run this, and now we have our front end. And now I can do hello world. I can increase the numbers here. I can add them. Everything happening via SSL. Sorry. So if I try to go to something else, if I try to go to HTTP localhost, you're going to see it redirects to HTTPS. Now, another very useful thing that we can do with NGINX is load balancing. And the basic idea of load balancing is we have multiple instances of the same application running on different servers. And in order to not overwhelm a single server with all the user requests, what we do is we distribute them using NGINX across all these different instances. So if we look at this server running right now, our Flask application, what we could do is we could just run 3 different instances of that application and then call a different instance depending on which instance's turn it is currently. So what I can do, for example, is I can open up 2 more terminals. I can zoom in here, I can zoom in here, and then here I can say python3 app.py, and I can say --port 5555. And then I can navigate here to my current directory as well, to the backend, and I can say python3 app.py --port 5556. And then I can do the same thing down here. I can navigate to my current directory, to the backend, python3 app.py --port 5557. So now I have 3 instances of the same application running. And if I go now into my nginx config file, so if I say nvsu nginx config, what I can do is, first of all, let's get rid of the SSL to not be confused. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that. Let's also remove this for the sake of simplicity here. Let's say listen 80 up here. Let's remove the server down below. So we have our basic setup here again with the front end and the back end. What I want to do now is I want to say up here, upstream, backend underscore API. And in here now I'm going to define 3 different servers. So I'm going to say server localhost 5555. And then I'm going to copy paste that. I'm going to say 5556, 5557. I'm going to use semicolons here. And these are now 3 servers that are considered to be the backend API. And now all I need to do load balancing using NGINX is I need to replace the /API localhost 5555 here by just the backend API. So by just saying HTTP backend API. That basically means that now we're going to use all these instances instead of just one. So I can say sudo nginx-s reload. Let's go here. The front end is still running. Let's just move it to a different screen. Let's go to this. Let's move it to screen 4 or to workspace 4. And now let's no longer use, of course, HTTPS. Let's just go in HTTP. I forgot to change one important thing. We need to also, of course, go back into our backend and change this to HTTP. So this is always important to change this accordingly. So now npm run def. And now I'm going to use Chrome here because Firefox seems to not be able to realize that I'm no longer using HTTPS. Now I have my front end running. If I press fetch hello, I get a request here. I do get a 404, so that is not good. Let's see what the problem is. Probably I'm missing a slash again. Is that the problem? Not sure about that. Let's go and try again. Reload. Okay, there you go. Now it works. You can see I get 200 here. I get hello world here. And now if I press the button again, I get it here. If I press it again, I get it here. And if I now spam the button, you can see that the workload is distributed across the 3 servers. You can see my 3 instances are running. I'm pressing the button. I'm constantly getting the requests here. Same with this function. If I say add, I constantly get a different, I every time get a different server handling my requests. Of course, I'm just connecting, or I'm just communicating with the NGINX instance, but behind the scenes, load balancing is happening. And of course, it makes sense if these are actually on different machines. So this is the idea of load balancing, and this is how you do it with NGINX. Just provide an upstream block here, or context, or directive, and then specify the different server IP addresses, and then specify backend API. Now, next up, I want to show you a simple example of caching using NGINX. For this, I'm going to use a different Flask application now. So I'm going to navigate to my working directory. And here I have now a cache example, which is an app PY. Very, very minimalistic. We have a single route time, which returns the timestamp. Nothing else. Very, very simple. But we're going to cache this, and the only reason I'm caching this, or the only reason I'm using this application to showcase caching, is because this is a value that constantly changes. So without caching, we would get a different value every single time. With caching, we're going to get a cached response, and we're going to only get a new value when the cache is expired. So that is just to showcase the principle. Of course, there are many other more reasonable use cases for that. But in this case, it's just an example to show you how it works, and then you can adapt this to your respective use case. So we're going to say here nvsu and then the config again. And all we want to do now is we want to get rid of that. We want to go to the server. Now we're going to specify here in the HTTP context, we're going to say proxy underscore cache underscore path. And we're going to say that our cache shall be located in temp and cache. And then we want to say the zone, keys underscore zone, is equal to, for example, my cache. And we want to allocate 10 megabytes for that. So this is how we specify this. And now we're no longer needing this API. We're just going to use slash. We're going to use proxy pass to port 5000 because this new application is running on port 5000 to not have any conflicts. Then we're going to say proxy underscore cache, my cache. So we're using this cache here. And we're going to say proxy underscore cache underscore valid. And we're going to say 200 and then 10 seconds. So this means every 10 seconds, we're going to actually get a new response, and in between, we're going to get the cached response. So we can take a look at that. I'm going to say sudo nginx and then -s, reload. And now I'm going to go to my current directory again. I'm going to go to the cache example. I'm going to run the app.py service, and then let's go to localhost. Now it says not found because of course our endpoint is /time. And now you can see I get a timestamp. And if I reload, I don't get any new timestamp. But if I wait for 10 seconds, I'm going to get a new timestamp because this is now the cached response. And if I wait for long enough, I'm going to get a new response. Now 10 seconds, I'm also going to get the cached response. then after 10 seconds, I'm going to get a new response, a new fresh response, so to say. There you go. And this is how caching basically works. We can go back and look at the config file, etc NGINX. And this is the idea. We provide the path, we choose the cache, and we say how long it shall be valid. And last but not least, what I want to briefly show you now is an example using Docker Compose. So the setup is the following. We have our backend, we have our front end, we have a directory certificate. So inserts, you can see we have fullchain.pem, the private key.pem. We have a directory NGINX, which in this directory we have confd. In this directory, we have a simple configuration file, default conf. You can see it's the basic SSL configuration. We have the server port 80 being redirected to the SSL server. We have here again, listen 443. We have the certificate key, and we have our basic locations, same as before, nothing new. And essentially what we do is we have our Docker Compose YAML. And here we have a bunch of services. We have the front end, we have the back end. This is quite simple. We just build front end, we just build back end. We expose the ports, that's it. And in for the NGINX instance, we pull the image NGINX Alpine. We expose these two ports, HTTP and HTTPS, and we load the certificates and the configuration, and that's basically it. So maybe one more thing that we didn't have before. We also have, of course, the Docker file for the backend, which is just that. Not production ready, of course. We're just using debug mode Flask running of the application. Same for front end. If we look at the Docker file, we have npm run dev, host being 0000. This is important for the Dockerization, otherwise it doesn't work. But yeah. Very minimalistic setup. And then once we have that, we can just say Docker Compose up and then -- build to build it and then run it. And this essentially accomplishes the same thing. I need to enter a password, but that's how you can Dockerize the process of NGINX. Now we have one single port that is targeted all the time. Okay, we're already using port 80, of course. So I'm going to say sudo kill all NGINX to get rid of that. So let's do this again. And this is essentially going to accomplish the same thing. We're going to have port 443 being used. So let's go here. Let's say advanced. Let's say proceed. Unsafe. There you go. Fetch hello works. 2 and 2, 4 works. This is the Dockerized version. So that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it and I hope you learned something. If so, let me know by hitting a like button and leaving a comment in the comment section down below. I tried to cover a lot of different aspects of NGINX. I definitely didn't cover everything that you can do with NGINX. I didn't go into a lot of detail. I just wanted to give you an overview so you know what it's about, why it's important, because things like load balancing and centralizing everything to a single port, and also encryption and also caching and other things are super important. So NGINX is a really important tool in that process of professional deployment, which is why you should have heard about it. This video is like a starting point for you to look into more details when it comes to NGINX. So I hope you learned something. If you want to support the channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell to not miss a single future video for free. Other than that, thank you much for watching. See you in the next video and bye.